29. Rodin was on the floor. There was lightning in his eyes, and every cell in his body twitched. He knew what had happened, but not how. He'd been shocked before. Different places, different methods. All were painful. Aleph had her homemade stunner, testing it on him as he rose to leave her room. She'd had it set low, but it still knocked him to the floor. Another time there'd been a door rigged to send a jolt through anyone touching it. Rodin pulled his hand back too late and found himself against the opposite wall, his body twitching. And a third time a target had fought back, reaching for a cable and swinging it wildly in some substation. He remembered the smell of ozone, the air crackling with life. That time, Rodin had sent the blade on its true path even as the wire snaked across his chest. He could remember feeling the electricity finding his blades, leaping from metal to metal. He could remember the countless stabs as it ran through him. And he could remember how his screen and so many other tools needed repairing and replacing. Slowly, the flickering colors in his eyes settled, and he found himself on his back. He kept himself still, waiting for the final tingles to leave. There was a smell of burning, and his neck felt sore still. He brought his hand round. The skin was raw, his hair brittle. He heard laughter. Malice. He didn't turn.
Again, almost too easy. You think I wouldn't prepare? You think I wouldn't be ready for that arm holster?
Rodin knew others used similar gadgets. But not many. Ratch excited to meet the great Rodin. All the stories. All the lies hiding truth. Were Rodin's methods really that well known? Had he lost the element of surprise? Rodin glanced down towards the door and saw the fifth thug. He held a stunner in both hands, bulky and powerful. He also wore blackened goggles, and Rodin could make out the wire running down his neck.
Yes, Rodin. I've come prepared, as you can see. Those goggles show movement long before the naked eye can register it. And my companion had his instructions. Impressive, yes?
Rodin made no answer.
Oh, I know what you think of me. Not yet a big name, all talk and no action. But I have my surprises. I can plan and prepare. I think a lot of people are going to be finding that out soon. Once this is all over with my father, the name of Malice will be known to a great many.
Rodin felt the jarring in his body subsiding, fading to a tingle like the pins and needles sensation of reduced blood flow. He remained where he was. Let the man talk some more. He was repeating himself, but let him have his moment. Give him a chance to relax his guard.
I don't know how much you've figured out, but it's too much. See, I knew you were being too inquisitive, and then I got a message from Sporif. Breaking into his rooms, tampering with his screen. Tell me exactly, what did that tell you?
Rodin kept his eyes on Malice. The man stopped striding and looked down, his lips still upturned at the corners. He wore that smirk like a mask.
Well? What did you find?
It was time to see if the mask would come off. Rodin opened his mouth, hoping Malice would think him struggling even though the tingling was dissipating. He could feel his body returning to normal. Lots of things. Malice shifted his gaze, nodding to one of the thugs. Rodin tightened his stomach in an instant. The boot still hurt and he felt himself folding. He saw movement as the thug stepped back out of reach.
That's not an answer. I want to know, what did you find?
Give him something. Blood. Handyman. The gun wavered, Malice holding his head to one side.
That was it. 2 names? And Sporif went after you because of that?
He laughed, but it sounded forced.
Those names mean nothing.
Time to push a little further. They did to Effie. The laughter still sounded forced, but there was a dangerous edge to it, something uncontrolled.
That stupid bitch?
Your sister.
No. His daughter. Nothing to do with me. Always in her own bloody world, too good for the likes of me. And then spending all her time with those men and women, doing the only thing she was any use for. So I used her like the rest. Gave her what she wanted, the pathetic slut. It was all she knew how to do. You think she was going anywhere in her life? Huh? And my father thought her so high and mighty. All this fucking, just an aberration. A phase. He thought she'd come round, do something with her life. Bloody fool. That was her life. And you know what? The world's a better place with her gone. One less fucking pond scum.
His face was growing red and Rodin knew he'd struck a nerve. But he listened to the spaces between the words, watching Mala's eyes twitch, his gun hand waving, the other clenching into a fist. The man was ranting. He was arguing this with himself. Because Rodin knew the words were not the truth. Malice said what he wanted others to hear, not what he felt deep down. He tried to hide the guilt, and so he ripped into Effie with more venom, not wanting to face the truth. He was breathing heavily now, and a film of sweat was starting to build on his brow. He turned to Rodin once more, waving the gun in his general direction. The pause had allowed himself to regain composure.
You didn't think I cared for her, did you? I'm sure you worked out what all this was really about.
Rodin nodded, his head rubbing on the floor. He was remaining down, although his body felt fine now. But he let Malice believe he was still recovering. Getting in with your father. Going for his money. A nod.
Anything else?
The situation was familiar. Meeting someone who wanted to cause him harm, but who saw themselves as important. They wanted him out of the way, and yet they kept him talking. Because that was all they were good for, talking. Making themselves sound important. Malice liked to hear his own voice, and in this room he had his audience. Rodin on the floor, 5 thugs watching for any movement, and Joran on the chair still open-mouthed, his eyes passing from Rodin and Malice. And so he'd keep on talking, with the occasional burst of action from a thug. A reminder that he was in charge. He was the important one. He was worthless. Puffed up in his own self-belief, he'd reached the point where it was keeping him from reality. Talking through his plans with the enemy, because he believed himself to be untouchable. He needed to learn. And Rodin rolled on the floor, clutching his stomach, letting a slight moan escape his lips. Onto his back and back to his side. It was enough to catch the tableau surrounding him. The thugs were disciplined. They had not moved and would not unless instructed. He had their locations mapped. He needed to do something with that information now. He needed to push Malice one step further. He had asked if there was anything else. Rodin's mind ran over everything he had learnt, all the names that had come up in the conversations in the cafe, all the facts and rumors his research had uncovered. Pushing into a supply chain, aiming to take it over. Wary of the main man. Talking through the dangers but certain of triumph. Aiming to become the big man in the supply trade, a major player in drugs. Rodin knew enough of his plans to make the man uncomfortable. Boren off. The mask fell. For a moment, it was as if Malice was too stunned to speak. His jaw set firm, his eyes wide, throwing naked hatred at Rodin. Then his gaze shifted and he nodded. Rodin was ready. As the boot swung his way, he held his hands out, twisting his body as soon as he gripped. Twisting out of the way of the boot, he brought his own legs round. The thug fell, spinning as he went. The thug next to him shifted to one side, knocked out of the way. Rodin was on his feet, even as the two on the other side approached. A long reach duck under that, cut up into a wiry arm. Use the other blade to slice forward and up. The moves flowed. Rodin saw his attackers and read their movements. He moved into one, dodged another. He watched for space dancing. Always knowing where he should be. Maybe afterwards he would analyze. But in the moment, he reacted. He felt pain in his arm, a dull throb, and spun into it, grabbing the club and ripping it from the thug's hands, sending it to the floor before grabbing one of his blades. He used his whole body. Felt a knee shatter under his foot. Felt the edge of something solid as he brought his elbow back into a stomach. And felt the tension as the blade struck home. The thugs were good but not good enough. And Rodin stood surrounded by their bodies. He allowed himself a couple of deep breaths. Something about the fight concerned him. Instant replay filled his mind. Find the kills. One with a blade slashing his stomach, finished with a stab deep inside. A second rendered senseless with a knee to the head as he fell, then a slice across the throat. A third, bleeding but still fighting, finished when Rodin grabbed from behind, again slicing a throat. The fourth was the tall man. His arm bled profusely from that first strike. He had been tough to reach. Rodin could not remember delivering the final blow. Yet he lay with the rest, a wound deep in his side and a twisted neck, the head at an unnatural angle. None of the quartet were moving. No signs of breathing. Rodin knew they were all dead. He looked up. The fifth thug, the one with the goggles and stunner, was standing by Malice. Rodin noticed blood on his clothing. He wondered how close he'd been. And wondered why he had moved.
Impressive. Finally, something that lives up to your reputation.
Malice had moved back. He had allowed the fight to give him more time to regain his control, and now he was back to the smirking slimeball from before, overconfident and talkative.
I thought those I'd hired were good, but I guess they weren't the best. Shame. I could have made use of them later. Still, one good thing. I don't have to pay them now.
Rodin was struck by the familiarity of all this. Someone wanting him dead, hiring others to do their dirty work. Rodin standing amongst the dead bodies, the one who was after him waving a gun. A dull ache in Rodin's muscles, but a respite as he listened to the coward behind the weapon talk some more, the bodies already forgotten about. 4 more deaths. 4 people hired to inflict pain, and Rodin had been forced to kill them. He didn't even know their names. Did Malice? Maybe one of them, the one with the goggles. The deal would have been with their leader. Maybe they used aliases or street names, hiding their true identities. And now they were gone. More lives removed for the sake of one man. Malice had his eyes set on Boronov's operation, and nothing else mattered. The lives of others were meaningless. How many had died? About 20 of Effie's clients for starters. Not all of them were clean removals, so add more from the reports Rodin had read. Doubling the number would be an underestimation. Then add Sporif and the 5 thugs he'd hired. And 4 more here. About 50 then. 50 lives removed to satisfy the ambitions of one man. And nobody would be concerned by this. Nobody would come after Malice in revenge. The thugs knew the risk they ran, and any of their colleagues or friends would have accepted their possible deaths. Sporif himself might be missed by some, but Rodin doubted they would want revenge on Malice. Effie's clients, and the others who had been caught up in their removal. Sadness, anger, bitterness. But who would trace the axe back to Malice? Who would come after him? This was not unusual either. Rodin had over 10 years of data stored in his memories. A decade of being used as a tool by those like Malice. Removing others, swatting them to one side like insects. No thought for the target's lives. No thought for the effect of their removals on others. And in that moment, realization flooded through Rodin. He didn't want to do this anymore. He didn't want any more blood on his hands. He had taken too many lives. Some were guilty. Some deserved to die. But the fat man, the couple, what harm did they do? Even the thugs simply doing a job, same as Rodin. He couldn't kill. Not anymore. Rodin looked down at the blades he still held. Blood coated the metal. He reached down, cleaning them on the clothing of the thugs, finding patches that were dry. Then he rose, storing the blades within his jacket. He faced Malice with nothing in his hands. Malice held the gun steady. Confusion showed on his face, disguised as amusement.
Yes? You might as well put those pinpricks away. Not a match for this thing.
He raised the gun in emphasis.
Even if you let one of them fly, I'm sure I could get a shot off. And of course, my colleague here would detect the movement long before the blade even left your hand.
Rodin wanted to laugh. Malice thought he was sheathing his weapons in defeat. He would never understand. The thought ran through his mind, what if Malice fired? Rodin pictured himself standing, taking the bullet with acceptance. He saw how he would be thrown back. And he wondered if he would have time to smile as it all ended. Something must have shown on his face.
You think I won't use this? Of course you look on me as weak, don't you? Just because I pay others to do the more physical work. But surely that is business, yes. I want a job done, but know there are others who can do that job better than myself. If I have the money, it makes sense to hire them. Although looking at the mess on the floor, that hasn't worked out too well this time. But that doesn't mean I'm incapable of acting for myself, does it? You think I won't use this gun? You think only someone like yourself can be a cold-blooded killer?
This time the smile held a childish excitement. Even as Malice spun, Rodin knew what was about to happen. There was a retort, little more than a crack, and movement to the side. Joran, thrown back in his chair, jerking as if something had punched him from asleep. But the wound to his chest was not a punch. Blood welled, flowing freely from the hole. Joran tried talking, his hands in the air, his face pale. Then another crack sounded, and a hole appeared in his head, just visible before he flew back and to the side, the chair tumbling down on his body. Another pointless death. Legs stuck out from the chair, unmoving. One of the wheels on the chair leg still spun. A dark stain grew on the floor. And the gun was trained once more on Rodin. Malice watched him.
See, we are not so unlike, you and me. I can kill without flinching. And you stand there impassive, watching a friend die. But no, he wasn't a friend, was he? He was someone you knew and used. Maybe you liked him, I don't know, although what was there to like about some junkie who lived in squalor like this? He wasn't a friend, was he? You don't have any. Like me. I'll admit it. No friends. Just people I know. And people I use. Some might find that sad, but I think it's liberating. I can do what I want, get what I want when I want. Working with Sporif wasn't too bad, although his company was a little dry at times. But I wasn't interested in his company. For that, I could always look to hire someone else. And with no friends, there's nobody to hold you back. No stupid nagging voices telling you to stop. Nobody else to think about. It's the ideal existence.
Rodin felt himself shudder, keeping it to the inside. Were the two of them really so alike? But did he use people as callously as Malice suggested? Last time he was here, he had brought 5 little pills for Joran, easily more than normal payment for any job. Yes, he was after something, but he went out of his way to ensure Joran had something he would appreciate. What was a friend? The woman to the north, from all those years ago. They enjoyed each other's company, but that was part of the unspoken deal. They used each other, a brief respite from the drudgery and uncertainty of their daily lives. A little color. He thought of others. Jenna, and his willingness to take contracts from her, but underlying that was the comfort he felt in her district. And Paskia in the dome. He had allowed her to come with him to the glass despite the dangers, but had refused to bring her across with him. Knowing she would struggle to survive, or not wanting to be constantly looking out for her. And he had set her up with his job in the dome, assisting the artist. He had given her what he could. Friendship, or simply something to make himself feel better? Was he using her to assuage his guilt over leaving the artist so suddenly? Too confusing. This is what happens, Rodin thought, when friendship peers over the horizon. Existing in seclusion was easier. But it didn't make things perfect. There was the risk he would start seeing others as objects like Malice did. Like Sporif did. Like so many others did.
I think I'm going to enjoy this. And you can guarantee word will get out. Imagine, I'll be the man who bested the best, the man who removed the ultimate mercenary. Something to think about, yes. That would in so many ways make me better than you.
No, Rodin thought. You're not better than me. You remove me, my skills don't pass on to you. You don't gain my experience. You don't get my life. Kill someone and their life ends. It doesn't pass on to you.
This calls for something special, I feel. Put your hands behind your back. Don't worry, the man with the goggles will be watching. That's good. Now down on your knees. Get your trousers messy in all that blood.
Rodin did what Malice asked. Why refuse? It wasn't like he was going to stop the man. As he bent one knee then the other, he saw the 5th thug turn, glancing towards Malice, head tilted slightly. It was a questioning look, but Malice ignored it. Rodin noticed how the thug only held the stunner with one hand now. His left, the one closest to Malice, and the other hand rested by his hip. The fingers were spread. Rodin knew something was about to happen. He didn't know what. And a big part of him didn't care. If he came through this alive, he would carry on with his life in some way. If he never made it out of the room, it wasn't a problem. In fact, it would solve so many problems. Did he want to die? Not particularly, but the alternative wasn't too enticing. He had no friends, he had no job. He had nothing to keep him going. His death would not matter. He would live on for a while in stories those rats had heard, and those Malice would try to consume. But these would fade over time. His memory would be erased, like his body. Eventually, there would be nothing left. There was a strange comfort in that thought.
Again, you disappoint me. I expected more. I expected a fight. But I think I prefer it this way. I've already won. I have you at my mercy. You've caused too many problems, and it's time you were put down.
Rodin lowered his head. He wanted to face the man, use his eyes to tell Malice that he was not afraid. But he didn't care what Malice thought of him. He didn't care what Malice said later, boasting to any who would listen. The man was untrustworthy, so his words would not be accepted anyway. Nothing mattered.
Pathetic.
Rodin heard a derisory snort as he sensed the tension increase in the man's fingers, picturing them in his mind curled around the trigger. And he thought of the times his hands had held blades, the feel of them on his skin. The ribbed grips of his lances, the button fitting under his thumb slightly concave. The right amount of pressure, and the barely audible click as the reservoir was released. The slight shudder as the liquid was pumped into the target. And what he knew would be a coldness spreading from the injection, the feeling of numbness that would spread through the body. That peculiar realization that there was no longer control over the body. It was all flesh and blood, a frame of bones. Nothing more. There was a grunt and a crash. Rodin raised his eyes. He understood, but it made no sense. Malice was on the floor, blood flowing from a deep gash in his side. The thug was kicking his gun out of the way, then reaching down, one knee placed on Malice's chest. He held the blade to the man's throat, then turned.
You want to finish the job?
The voice was female, and Rodin could see now where long hair was tied back, hidden beneath the cap she wore tucked into her jacket. He shook his head. She shrugged, then ran the blade across Malice's throat with the sharp, definite movement of a professional. Malice shuddered a few times as blood arced out, then he was still. She stood, pulling off her goggles. Rodin knew where he'd seen her before. She was the one who had appeared at his side when he purchased the C-18. She worked for Boronov. He started to understand. Thank you. The words came from his mouth, and only then did he realize what she had done, what he was thanking her for. She had saved his life. Not simply in removing the one who was about to kill him, but in letting him escape without needing to act. He was free, but he had not needed to kill. She was giving him a new start, even though she didn't realize it.
No. Thank you. Boronov always says, it is fortuitous when someone who is becoming a nuisance is silenced by their other dealings.
She was leaning towards him, and Rodin knew this was a message. The words ran through his head, and eventually he clicked. Boronov was careful in how he dealt with others, and if Malice was becoming problematic, Boronov would not want to charge in unless he had to. He would bide his time, waiting for some of Malice's other dealings to go wrong. Then there was a chance that Malice would be removed by another's hand. All Boronov had to do was maybe ease things along a little. But how had word got out that Malice was looking to trap Rodin? Easy. After what happened to Sporif, Malice would be spooked despite his supposedly calm, tough image. He would have talked as he planned and hired these thugs. Boronov had enough connections to get one of his own on Malice's team. Wasn't it a risk? Rodin asked, indicating the 4 thugs on the floor. She shook her head and held up the stunner.
I came with this thing. Ideal for crowd control, which meant I had to stay back, where I could see everything and do what I needed to.
But no guarantee. You were in the room, working for someone who was after my removal.
The main man is careful. He knows how you work. He thought it unlikely you'd kill without provocation.
A shrug.
And so it turned out.
Patterns again. The work methods Rodin had built up over the years, the means for him to complete contracts with minimal fuss, had all become patterns there for others to study and follow. He had become predictable. He had another thought. So malice met his end in his struggle with myself. Nothing to do with Boranov. But one of Malice's thugs walks free uninjured. Bit hard to explain. She shook her head.
There's something I'd ask you to do about that.
She pulled down the collar of her top, and Rodin saw the pulse in her neck.
Slanax.
Yes. That made sense. Again his own methods, his own predictability. A thug incapacitated yet alive would be in his style. Standing he reached for his lance, the one with the drug she had requested. Corillax would not make sense. She needed to be out of it, incapable of seeing what went on. Unable to report on exactly how malice met his end. She was tall, Rodin thought as he raised his arm up. Her eyes were level with his, holding his gaze. Her chest rose and fell, a rhythm to calm her nerves. He made it as quick as he could, stabbing and injecting all in one fluid motion, pulling out the needle with speed as he reached up for her, supporting her dead weight. He lowered her, slow enough that she would not get injured, but fast enough that her position was natural. She looked peaceful. When she woke it would be to a room of dead bodies, 4 thugs who were spurred on by the promise of money, one innocent techie used as bait, and Malice the orchestrator of this carnage. Rodin didn't look at any of it as he rose, walking to the door. He didn't need to store the images for later. That life was over. No. Not quite. There was one loose end yet to deal with.